world-renowned psychotherapist.
Don't say that. The academia will come after me.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. The academia, they have no claims over God's creation.
You know, it's actually something interesting. I have been understanding why people do hold this standard, and there's necessity for holding a standard. Because like even in my field, there's no shortage of people that self-reference. And the academia does the same thing. They self-reference in their own academic studies. Like it's actually also isolated from reality. But I absolutely noticed the necessity for people to understand what exactly, those who are truthful are really who you want on your team. Those who put truth above all and make that their pursuit in their field. You can trust those people. But I think ultimately there's so much hubris tied to it, even from people who are self-proclaimed. Like you can announce yourself whatever you want now. You could start your own page. You can say things that are absolutely bombastic. And, you know, like I wouldn't be talking with you unless I absolutely believe that what you do is important for people to understand. And that is know the 5 books of Moses and then talk. And there was no shortage of people that have a lot to say about a book that they've never read and stories they don't even understand. And they deny the fact that they themselves have been affected by the institutions that claim that they know it. No, they don't. You haven't read it for yourself. You've gotten everybody's regurgitated opinion. You don't even know the 10 Commandments. And that's exactly what I wanted to start off with you, is just create this stage as to why we're talking here today, because of the absolute necessity for you to keep doing what you're doing. And why you're one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And this is a very special day for both of us, so that we can not only spread this message, but just understand the importance of having truth in your life. And you don't need to agree with it all the time. That's kind of the whole point. Love is not something we understand. It is something that takes our whole life to learn about. And you're telling me that truth isn't something that's going to make you feel a certain way. There's a reason why there's humility and humanity required when interacting with anything biblical. Because it's for who? Human beings. And when we begin to accept that, we can start receiving it. So there's no shortage of absolutely ridiculous claims and people saying it's one way versus the other. And the only thing that you're really preaching is read it for yourself. And that's exactly where you should start.
Yeah, and what you're saying is correct. It's absolutely the case that the claim of these institutions is that they exist in order to take care of people not being fraudulent, and the fact that they have their certification means that they're actually legitimate as opposed to someone who doesn't. But what people are not choosing to look at is the possibility that the institution is corrupted.
Well, this is like the number one rule. Before you go anywhere, know a little bit of it yourself. Before you go to a doctor, understand a little bit about your problem before you go there. This is the thing that I find to be very interesting, is it's like, why would people put themselves in a position to be completely and totally submissive to any philosophy that they don't understand?
By the way, to a human being's philosophy, right? The fallibility of human beings is self-evident, right? The tendency for human beings to tend towards corruption is self-evident. So where in the world does anyone decide to then have blind faith in a human being? It's like insanity if you think about it, right? Of course, it's this desire for faith in a higher power that we're looking for. Yet the higher power is not another human. It's not some angel or savior God.
Well, you know, that's something very interesting, is that there's actually an easy amount of power, and this is something understanding human nature that I've noticed, is that it's much easier to play God and get people to believe in you like you are God than it is for people to believe in God.
Yeah, because submissiveness, submission to a higher power, is an inherent instinct that we have, and a good one. But just like every instinct,
that's exactly the natural desire that we have as human beings, to be in service of, to serve something. If not integrated towards the highest possible ideal, which is an understanding of God, it is towards man. And you are helpless to understand that. And you know, I have a lot of non-denominational Christians, a lot of spiritualists, and I notice that the people that do the best, not only in my programs, but do the best in life, are people that could identify their values and connect to them outside of their own feelings and emotions, meaning that they've had the ability to experience and challenge the philosophy, and they have a connection with it through 3 things: stories, the law itself, meaning understanding what it can do for you, and then of course who you are in relationship to that. All of those 3 things give you the ability to bind yourself towards that, and that sets us free, because ultimately your alternatives are, you know, Egypt with Pharaoh, and of course we're going to be using a lot of biblical analogies today, or you live a life in the unknown in the desert, experiencing miracles beyond your own beliefs to the point where it blows even Pharaoh's mind. And he's one of the most powerful individuals on planet Earth at the time. And believe me, that's a hard thing to integrate. And I think people should have an understanding of Pharaoh is very similar to anybody of capacity. And your whole world is being changed before your eyes. That there's something outside of you. Well, okay, how much to the point is it outside of you? Actually, I'll show you how truth exists outside of you. I'm going to take 6 million people and expose them to that. And where are they going to be free? Not in your little temple or whatever, your little sphere that you call Egypt. They're going to be free in the desert. And that right there is the wisdom that we somehow think isn't relevant today. And at the end of the day, when it even comes to helping people, there's no shortage of hubristic philosophies that don't really help people understand why they're here and what the most difficult thing in life is. And I think these are the two most difficult things. A, learning how to love. And then what real belief looks like. Both of these things require somebody who's willing to put themselves to the test in every area of their life. And a real person that believes wears it on their skin. And that speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I think that something that both you and I try to counter is the fact that people try to laugh off the 5 books of Moses as some relic of history.
Yeah, they never read it.
No, they've never read it, and they've never humbled themselves to the way life actually is. And so they use their projection of their moralism against God. And they say, well, actually, I disagree with God's morality here. And it's like, really? You are a human being. Either no morality exists, because no human being can determine morality, or God's morality exists, in which case it's above your morality, and your judgments quite literally mean nothing.
Well, there's something really beautiful about that. Look, if we were created in God's image, that means we are not disconnected from the ability to receive divinity, right? Now, he created the ability for us to have a relationship with him in the form of being human. So there's a serious amount of wisdom and understanding that perhaps maybe what God asks from you and what you feel work in direct relationship with each other towards what is really what God wants. Like, I couldn't imagine, and this is actually for anybody who's read the biblical stories, it's like you want to learn something about God. Don't just read the laws that God asks. Read the stories, and then you'll understand the law, and you will see the dimensions by which they function. And the story of Abraham is the best one, where when God goes to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham, God says, I'm destroying it. There is no righteous there. He says, go get your nephew Lot. We're taking him out, and I'm sinking this city. And God says, I'm going to turn it over. And Abraham presents, if there were 40 righteous people, would you let the city stand? And he goes, if there were 40, I'd let it stand. If there were 30, I would let it stand. If there were 20, I would let it stand. If there were 10, I would let it stand. And so there's this absurdity that as human beings, we're not supposed to go, what? No, please. It's exactly the point. But perhaps maybe give that a little bit of resistance, and you could see where the truth really shines. The danger of distance, and something I talk about a lot in psychology, is that if you do not confront what you believe that person is trying to say, you confirm your bias about what that person was trying to say, and you hold that bias over them. So not only do you confirm a lie, you create more distance from the truth that could be found by two individuals coming together. And so ultimately, even with God's law, you get familiar with God. This is first generation. Like Abraham was the first person to truly walk in his ways. To put some skin in the game. Think about how insane he is. All right, everybody. Found this new God. Pull out your penises, let's get circumcised, right? Because that's what he was presenting. That's somebody who got skin in the game. No pun intended, but genuinely there's a genuine kind of faith that an individual can create in their life when they're willing to trust that.
And that's what's required. What's required is skin in the game. What's required is humility and acknowledgement of the nature of God and the fact that it's not that simple, and his judgment is extremely harsh. And yes, your response...
And I think that's beautiful. And for anybody
it is beautiful. Yeah. But your response, as you said, Abraham pleading with God to save Sodom and Gomorrah, Moses pleading with God to save the children of Israel after the golden calf, and all of these times where God says, I want to destroy, and then you have a man interceding and undertaking the task of praying for his fellow human beings. That's a very powerful quality of the original leaders in the Bible. That being said, That's
The people
our
that were
side of the
closest
game.
to God had the most, what's the best way to put it? Had more chips than they could possibly imagine in that relationship, right? And there's a big emphasis on one thing, that there is a relationship with an individual and God. That does not exist anywhere institutionally. It is, your relationship with God is through this. Your relationship with prayer is through this. Your relationship with study is through this. Not through this. Like the contents of what we are made in his image, that isn't the vessel by which we do it. And of course, nobody would care to act, but this is true across the board for everything. And it's like, what fundamentally are we trying to come close to? And how do we come close to what we're trying to come close to? And it's like, well, through the one thing we all have access to, our humanity. And it's not at a church. It's not at your congregation. It's not at your temple. It's not at your mosque. And it's like, it's in the contents of your own home. It's not across the sea. It's in your heart. And, if people don't understand this when they read this, what they're pretty much reading is through the frame of a rejection of their own humanity, because that is exactly what the institutions have taught them up to this point. And, and I really make this very clear, but there are very, very few people in the world that want to live the biblical life. They refuse to understand the biblical patriarchs. They also refuse to understand how that it's accumulation of stories that allow you to see what it is to have a relationship with God, that then allow you to connect to him. Because one of the biggest commandments is, I want your heart, I want your soul, and I want you to love me with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and all that you possess. The amount of heart that we collectively have, and I know that we can speak as Jews, is little to none. And you could see it. Because to be connected to something means that it genuinely fulfills you. And you don't need to hide behind the guises of, another form of Mr. Sir Happy. This is our sect of happy, right? Like, no, what about the people that can connect to it through their heart? A completely and totally vulnerable relationship with the divine, how that could be mirrored for others. And, I speak even from the standpoint of, helping men particularly, is that it's very hard to help men that are unopen to the idea of the divine. In fact, everything they do is narcissistic. The more capable they are, the more pharaoh-like they become. That anything that they present never satisfies them, because they constantly close themselves off to the idea that they are connected to something more, and that perhaps is the human experience, that we inevitably have a connection to this. And a denial of that keeps you delusional to thinking that that's you, when it's not. And I think what we're really afraid of at the end of the day is learning how to believe, learning how to have faith.
Think about it like this. If you submit yourself to God's morality and the Torah, it's not just what you want for the world. It's what you want for yourself. Meaning, if you accept that, then you accept that you're under those laws too, and that you're held accountable to that standard too. Now that's frightening. Now that means that you better watch your back. You better be very careful how you behave sexually, morally, in business, with family, in relationships, in all aspects of life. God wants your heart, your soul, and all of your resources. That means that your entire essence is dedicated to him. And he is your life. And by the way, that's a beautiful thing that Moses, I do want to just say this thing that Moses told the Jewish people when he was talking about the covenant. He said, this is not an empty thing from you. Rather, it is your life and is the lengthening of your days. All right? And how many Jews consider the Torah to be an empty thing? To be just, meaningless, stupid, cultural hogwash. God forbid. This is your life, and this is the lengthening of your days. We don't have anything else. Moses also says, this is your wisdom to the eyes of the people, to the eyes of the nations. This is your understanding. Any wisdom that Jews possess, any value that we possess, is derived directly from God and his revelation to us.
Well, this leads to a much bigger conversation, which is, I work in a lot of the dating world, and it's a big world. It's a big conversation. And I can tell you, there's one thing that's missing in the dating. It's two things: values and humanity. There is no such thing as values. They become the metric of survival that people adopt within their own cultural identity. In other words, meaning you don't believe in what you believe in. You like what it gives you and how other people react to you within the own sphere that you can get significance from. The dangers of that is because we see this as to be like, oh, it's at the cost of this, marriage over the cost of my sex drive. And that's exactly, how you cost your marriage, right? So paradoxically you're like, well, a connection to God at the cost of my flesh. Well, then there goes your connection to God. And it's like, well, because these things were all actually designed to be elevated. Everything needs to be challenged. And that's why opposition is important. You know, our humanity works in tandem with our spirit. Masculine works in tandem with feminine. But ultimately, there's a level of opposition from these forces, right? Because they come close together to bring the best out in each other. And there's periods of time where it's upward. Because that's exactly what you're doing. It's collectively upward. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that if people do not have a relationship with their values, they can't even appreciate when you give them things. Meaning that they have the most advanced form of survival that you can ever see throughout human history that we now can have now. Okay, people, do they actually want to be masculine? Well, no, because if people actually wanted to be masculine, they'd connect to it, and your children would understand a little bit about it, because children really see what's real and what's fake, and they will start to mimic a lot of what you're connected to. And then there's the other part of it, which is, if these values don't exist outside of your own ego, well then what exactly are you protecting if it's not yourself? And so this whole conversation of this steady downfall that we're seeing in not only just relationships, but in just human contact in general, human relationships in general, there is no shortage of people calling each other narcissists every 5 seconds. And there are people, the people who say that typically have no understanding of their own value system and no understanding of human nature. And those two things somehow don't go in the same sentence. When people say values, they think ideal. They think missionary with the lights off. And it's like, wait, what is this about? What's happening here, right? Things feel so good when it's all just idealistic, but you're unaware of what really happens in the completely and totally idealistic environments. Is the corruption that you can never imagine in some of the most hedonistic environments that you could ever fantasize. And so you're like, holy shit, I'm not safe.
Now integrate that.
Yeah, now integrate that. And so then now you're like, okay, what's the importance of the biblical stories? Well, the biblical stories will show you what it's like to stand alone in a world where it's that confused. And where does it come from? It comes from those who are willing to go out for themselves to find that truth. You understand what that takes? It's a life of failure. It's a life of rejection. It's a life of suffering. It's a life of resistance. Oh my God, it's a life of sadness in a lot of ways. But there's almost like some people who are willing to accept the harshest implications about life are also the people that are willing to believe in God. Because it's not much of a belief in God when you've made him your butler in the sky.
Exactly.
It's not much of a belief in God when you live on Candyland. There's no need for God. What is he? Just unconditional love? What else is he? Do you want it? We can have a bunch of other terminologies, but if you're not familiar with the stories, the foundation, the values, then everything, even the places that say the word God and love, are going to be the places that stand in exact opposition of it. So the importance of the individual now more than ever is because, guess what? I'm sorry to break it. Every single one of those institutions that you see standing is on its way down because it's not rooted in truth. And it's going to take individuals that want to find it for themselves. And there's going to need to be an uprising, a revolution of individuals who want to find the truth themselves. And they're going to have to come to what has shaped the ability for us to have this enlightened conversation, because 400 years ago, we wouldn't have had the luxury to have this conversation, which we can have now. So there's a lot of what we have built off of that is necessary to maintain. But right now, and I mean this, it's not enough to just say it. You have to be someone that connects to it with their humanity and shows that actually humanity's potential and greatness is reached through a divine ideal. And without that, humanity is just another term to get you to pay for your course.
That's true. And making it this far down the line in history and having all the achievements that humans have come to, all you can hear about in the news, for example, or in people's worrisome dialogue is how everything can fall instantly. And you know what? That's true. Everything can collapse into war instantly. Everything can collapse into famine and plague instantly. Those are curses, divine wrath, right? You want to speak about divine, you cannot speak about divine love without speaking about divine wrath. You can't speak about God's mercy without his judgment. That is the totality of the picture. And again, people cannot be living in a fairy tale world. Faith in God comes from being deeply rooted in reality, being deeply grounded in even just the nature of the earth that the Bible outlines, being dark and chaotic.
Well, I think that's a beautiful
the
thing.
Face
right?
of the deep.
The beginning chapters of Genesis are the duality that we function under, that we have, that is mirrored in nature. A majority of the stories are talking about nature And then just to top it on top, here's man and woman. Just so before you think that this isn't part of a collective thing that I've created called duality, right? And so there's a deep sense of understanding in reality. And I think that's, even for a lot of people who are struggling religiously, like, where do I go? What's my book? What is it? Like, there's a reason why when people go to nature, they're like, I feel more connected to this thing. And it's like, because that is untouched truth.
Just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
And that's also the other thing, which is, and I wanted to throw this your way because there's no shortage of people that are struggling with who they are and what they believe in and what to believe in. And I want to see what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it takes individuality as the prerequisite for pursuing knowledge. You cannot bow down to the great titans of knowledge just because they have a title, just because they have a place in history. The reality is the amount of dumb horse shit that has been said by the greatest names in philosophy and religion and science over thousands of years, it's just plain dumb. And you can call it out if you were allowed to. But because people are held accountable to this orthodoxy of judgment and scholarly expertise, well, now they can't open their mouth in the face of these people. Now, I don't mean to say that you shouldn't respect people and their achievements, but at the same time, don't be fooled by a title. Don't be fooled by the fact that someone is called so great if their actions don't back it up, if their words are not full of wisdom, if their teachings do not drive you towards life, it's ultimately worthless. And that's why it's so important to return to the foundation.
Yeah, religiously speaking, you have to be very honest. It's like you want to judge a philosophy, it's by its fruits. And ultimately, most of the fruits that I'm seeing now are bad, rotten. But there's a level of wisdom in that. So there almost is fundamentally this big split that we're seeing, right? It's the hyper-secular world of pleasure, passion, play, but necessities, right? And then, of course, the hyper-religious world, which seems to be very void of that. I honestly see that there's, for the course of my life, one of the things I really plan on doing is speaking at the religious events because of an understanding of the biblical stories and how they've shaped our minds and how they've allowed us to have these conversations and how the idea of the individual has only existed in that book and it's shaped every single book here on out. I was just speaking about this today is that, you want to learn a lot about human nature, read the book that allows you to read it from the dawn of time, and that's the Genesis story, all the way to even you would see start some of the more of human nature, the story of the spies, and that's typically when the stories start to trickle out. Even Korach, I think Korach is like one of the last big stories that they have, or is it the spies? I'm not familiar, but I know it's one of those two. There just seems to be like everybody has had their own opinion on something that they need to read for themselves, and the big dangers of that is, and it's like when you look at that book and you isolate it for only the people that are, so to speak, the Jewish people or the chosen ones, what you do is you eradicate the universality of the biblical stories, which unite us all together and have shaped cultures and a foundation for us to even have peaceful voluntary exchange, to say what's on our mind, to understand that the truth is what we're here really to seek, and that we have a foundation that does not limit us in our expression. But most people don't know it. And it's like, well, they don't know it, then they're left with their projection of it. And then it's like, well, you've probably been hurt before, so it's a negative projection for certain. Well, then what are you left to? The other vices that will manipulate you, chew you out, and leave you with nothing. And one of the stories I wanted to share, just to give people an insight on how much this shines a light on human nature. As the Jews were taken out of Egypt, the sea was split, the 10 plagues, miracles beyond miracles, fed in the desert, taken to a mountain. God spoke 10 utterances in front of 6 million people. These 10 utterances are what shaped our culture. They've stood the test of time. They're unshakable, and they still seem to be the thing that allows people to interact with each other. Most people can't even name them, but the 10 utterances, the 10 commandments. The fascinating part is what did the Jews do after Moses is 2 hours late to his 40-day and 40-night process to embody those testimonies, tablets, something that is going to be the foundation to, well, a golden calf. And we read the story and we're like, and of course, as Jews, we have a boatload of midrashic interpretation, how it wasn't us, I promise, it was the other guys, right? It's just so sad how that comes out in our culture. But no, that's the story of human nature, and it's one of the greatest psychology books for anybody to read, and the way to live your life. And it's a way to live your life, especially if you're willing to engage in the conversations that surround it and actually be somebody who's willing to find the truth for themselves. You know, my whole life, I've always struggled with, I wanted to finish that up and then share something a little more personally. Maybe you can share some things on your own note. And it was, the importance of the story made me realize that, oh my God, that's me. When I am showed revelation, I look for control. When I have been given freedom and I have the embodiment of it, everything that happened, I doubt. Why? Because I'm a slave. And I think that's the one big lie that a lot of people aren't willing to look at in their life. You're a slave. You've been conditioned to be one. Oh, it's not Egypt? Yeah, but look how it's made you function a certain way, in service of something that is not directly in service of you. And believe me, there's only one being that is, and that's God. You know, you don't place any conditions over yourself, you set yourself free. What is God? An unlimited being. A belief sets you free. It's not the answer to all of your questions, so to speak. It's actually really the beginning by which you can ask questions. And this time it's not hubristic. And so what I really wanted to share, especially for people that are listening, and I know that you know this for certain, is that a lot of the time we're faced with opposition. You know, and that opposition is sometimes, you know, there shall be no promiscuous men or women in the children of Israel. And I'll tell you one thing. If there's one thing that has saved my life from going to underground sex parties, it is that line. And now before you go ahead and say, well, hey man, you know, you're way more free without it. No, the Naftali Moses that you see now talking to his best friend would have died years ago. And I would have been the one that burned my life down. There were two things for me: motivational speaking or porn star. Somehow this challenged me more than this one did. And there's a reason why this one did, because there was a system of values that I needed to connect to in order to be the man that's here talking to you now. And so you're probably like, well, I struggled the shit out of that. Yeah, everything else I was great with. Totally cool. Everything's good. Yeah. Doesn't affect any of my fucking, does it? Right? And then when I realized, oh my God, wow, this ideal is exactly what allowed me to find the value in sex that I've been looking for my whole life. And so, you know, often we think that, you know, these things are the end of the conversation. It says thou shalt not. No, it's the beginning by which you evolve the nature that's in resistance of it.
That is the importance of taking these words literally, because when you're actually familiar with what it says in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, not the whole Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, where you are given clear guidance principles, how to behave. One line can save your life. Do not be promiscuous. Do not kill. Do not steal. Do not have immoral sexual relations. That saves your soul. That saves your body. That saves your life. You start to realize that's where the conversation starts. Okay.
It's exactly where the conversation starts. And it's the point by which the nature is fully evolved, meaning that it is brought out, when I say out of its primal state, actually, how about this? Through its primal state, it's become spiritual. And that's the craziest idea ever. And it's like, well, the urge to, you know, just to go to your underground sex party in Los Angeles, put on the mask, have a great time. That's a very real thing to have. And it's like, you know, I noticed that religion is bulletproof until the ideas of penises and vaginas come into the conversation. Is that everybody has an answer and it's perfect. Their kids are so great. Look at us, babe. We did such a good job with the kids. And then they hit puberty, right? And then what happens after they hit puberty? They're like, fuck all of this. And you're like, yeah, I would say fuck all of this too, especially when you have what you call a driving force to be experiencing a few things: pleasure, play, passion. Well, those are some human characteristics. And so mistakenly for, you know, the spirit, oh, it's your desire to just be with one. It's like, no, actually, it's your desire to reproduce wide and across in all angles in every dimension. And then wait, 1 second, there's a value, there's an ideal I can strive towards, there's a story of who I want to be, there's the ability for me to achieve a revelation in my life. This isn't just the survival and reproduction narrative that has been preached to everybody as a human. Actually, in fact, through these things, through finding the only thing that I care about, being myself, that I want to survive and that all I want to do is reproduce, I build a life by which my soul calls to. That's not being preached. You know, human nature is introduced and it is rejected immediately. And I have to tell you one thing, is that most people aren't aware of this, but when I coach people, eventually it comes down to the beliefs that they've been taught, not only through the experiences of their life, but through what their parents have taught them that make them feel that they are rejected. By the way, you want to know something very interesting? We were a religious society and a religious world until about 2 generations ago. Meaning that everybody's don't do this, don't do that, really stemmed from the belief that they had in relationship to religion. And yeah, you're telling me that doesn't affect us? It deeply does. Because one person has a confused idea about thou shalt not this, thou shalt not that. You see the first incorporation of any sexual nature as evil. Well, then congratulations, that's going to exist on the back end. And that's going to be what you call a generational trauma. And so it's like, okay, is this important? It's absolutely important because it works in direct relationship with what shapes us as human beings and individuals, and that's where all change happens. So understanding of these values isn't just to say you believe in them. You know what I had to accept? I don't want a wife and kids. Why don't I? Well, my behavior doesn't want it. And then I said, okay, shit, well, if I can see myself as I am right now, and I understand that's the ideal, do you want to know how I know it's the ideal? It's difficult. You can't just proclaim it and hang out with us. We're Mr. and Mrs. Values, or we're Mr. and Mr. Values. Not in that way. There's a danger of that. There's a serious danger of just seeing people proclaim things, not be the things that they say. And the dangers that happens with that are confused children. It's pretty hard to sell them on that when they're like, do you know the whole no smoking thing? To me, as you smoke it, doesn't really line up.
Well, look.
And you claim to love God, but all I see is miserable people. I don't like this God, right? Like, there's a certain point where you trying to find a shortcut to just proclaim these values is exactly what corrupts the later generation to internalize them.
We want to be in touch with our essential nature as human beings. The problem is that we don't know how to access that primal self that we're driven to be.
We also don't trust God's laws.
That's the whole point.
That's a very big
and so who can define our nature? Can Charles Darwin define our nature? Can your fleeting passions define your nature? Can your parents define your nature? Can your teachers define your nature? No, God, only God can.
Well, I would say that even this, I wouldn't put discredit it. I would say that God is the accumulation of all of those things outside of your own ego.
Well, outside of everyone's ego. That's the whole point.
It's outside of the bubble.
It's not to say that your parents cannot impart truth unto you, but their truth has to come from God. Well, otherwise, it's just their own opinion.
Well, that's exactly the point, right? Your parents do shape you. What your teacher tells you does shape you, right? These things have effects. But to say that these effects aren't with meaning and purpose is exactly how you create like a Darwinian logic, right? Where everything is pretty much just a process of cause and effect and evolution based off of environmental circumstances, right? But that's exactly what the big shift is that eventually there's what you understand, the incorporation of creativity, right? And that seems to be something that monkeys really have a hard time understanding, right? That's like not literally monkeys, but just something we can even embody in a lot of ways. Is that when we start to understand the accumulation of all of these things and how it shaped us, then you could start opening up to what God really wants from you. Because if you rejected all of these things, it would be functioning on the back end as you start interacting with divine law. And then now it's just an argument of two people having a projection with each other, which is like one of my least favorite things. There's a reason why biblical conversation goes nowhere. It's because people aren't speaking with the foundation of it. They're talking about the nuances of words, opposed to understanding what exactly the message meant. And I think that ultimately people that don't just pull out the line and they go, here, it says this in the Bible. And then you read this, well, it says this in the Bible. Well, actually, this is the definition. It's like, well, fuck off. This is the foundation by which you can discover truth. We pick on these things. Let's see what's required for us now, genuinely. What is it going to take? And so I was thinking about a better way of wording it, which is, it is the foundation that allows you to understand truth. You don't need to speak it saying that it's truth. Meaning that people are connected to this don't have to quote it every 5 minutes. It has shaped their ability to speak truth. And there is one thing that I think we all would desire as human beings is to see our potential, to see our capacity of humanity, what exactly it can strive towards, what can it achieve, We have these ideals, these archetypes that go through our mind that we know we can because we see them and we see ourselves with them. And we look at this unforgiving reality and we're like, how is that ever possible? And that's the beauty of it. When you say those words, that's when you can start a process of developing faith in the divine. Only then. But until you haven't seen the depth and darkness of reality and how it could shred you with not a thing you can do about it. There isn't a thing you can do about it. Then and only then is the incorporation of faith, because you'll understand the necessity for it.
Well, again, if divinity is real and it's not just this vague conversation that people like to have, then it's going to be real at every level, down to the depths, up to the heights, right? And so there's no gap there. And the foundation of spiritual connection is being based in reality, is having an understanding of your lesser nature and your higher nature, your ability to do good and your ability to do evil. But ultimately, when it comes to what you should do, you need to submit to God, because that's the only way for your instincts to be guided in the right direction. Otherwise, you're just a ball of potential that's buzzing around in every direction. And as you see nowadays, everyone has their own definition of morality, because everyone's just driven by their emotions. That's not enough.
Well, it's not enough. I like how you made a distinction there. It's not enough. To be driven by just your emotions is not enough. You need a system of values. And by the way, I really mean this. It's like the number one thing I get from all women. And I have a thing for bad guys and I'm helpless to them. And awareness comes from a system of values, by the way. To be aware and develop awareness means that you need to consider your character and how you affect others. So you're incorporating, and by the way, this is what I think is very interesting about being Jews, and it's a little psychological thing I was able to identify, which is to look at your own character and how it affects others. It's the beginning of awareness, which is also the beginning of connecting to your values. And I like to think of it this way, because, at the end of the day, I think that we're people who claim to be so connected to things that they haven't fought for, that they haven't damn near died for, and that they can't speak about. I'm sorry, you're not connected to it. You can just get out of the room. Stop hiding behind the guises of that. But for people that understand this, and in relationship to what I was saying before, which was awareness comes from a value of trying to investigate how you affect others because of an understanding of how capable you are as a human being. So there has to be this understanding of your nature and the willingness to investigate that. And so I noticed across the board in dating is that a guy is completely and totally irredeemable, meaning cannot be redeemed, aimed upwards towards anything constructive if he's not aware and he's untethered. Because not only will he never see your efforts were just to get what he needs, and then even when things no longer suit him, he will never recognize what you gave him and you'll be left dry. So there's a serious kind of darkness behind this, and it's a necessity for the people that are aware are the people that have a value and a necessity around being aware, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically. And what ends up happening to those people is they can not only really connect to their values, they can keep you safe. So in my life, I always thought about it, like as a Jew, and it's like, okay, where does Jewish guilt come from? And I was like, well, the constant analysis of character and the effects of that character on people. We have a deep, deep awareness and an understanding of that, so that'll make you more prone to guilt.
Well, yeah, a man with no values and no morality is just a creature of the depths,
Yeah, a creature based off capacity.
Stands for nothing. He is not a developed man, and if he has admirable traits, you better believe they're going to be used for the wrong things and create destruction.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing, is that I noticed that for people that do not care to dive into their depths, and this is the importance of it, I have so many coaches that I work with me that help me get better. I have friends that I have antagonizing conversations with, and you're like, who would do this? Yeah, real good question. Who would do this? Somebody who believes in the necessity of doing it in pursuit of goodness, truth, and love. You got a better idea? Because that's what's going to set you free, a pursuit of those ideals. And then now you'll have a reason to actually struggle. Because right now your reason to struggle is better pussy on the other side, right? Or what's another reason to struggle nowadays? You look cool. Yeah, people will give you respect. Respect, bro. Open up the door, chief. You know what I'm saying? But what happened to the understanding of why we're here? Like, that's the reason why we do this. Because there's something far beyond our own understanding that is meaningful eternally in this physical, limited lifetime that we have. Why would you do this if there isn't a value that you believe? And here's the thing about values. The best values are eternal, meaning that they exist in all dimensions. They have the most meaning behind them. There are things that we do value, but there's a hierarchy of values. And if you can't accept the hierarchy of values by which they come, then you won't understand which values you do connect to. How do you know the values you connect to? Well, the ones that you're not willing to compromise. Why? Great question to ask. Well, because if I don't have my word, then what do I have? Well, if I don't have my integrity, then what can I give? And so this is the importance of it, because I'm coaching now, and I'm coaching more and more and more and more and more. And I'm realizing the importance of the divine in the conversation has been really helping people take leaps, because their life now has purpose. It's no longer a question of calibrated risks. It's a question of belief. and how connected you are to your own life and to what you truly do believe. And that's going to be in the values that have shaped us.
Yeah, and you start to realize that you're not alone in this struggle. You're not just this little flesh microcosm, on a planet. No, you're actually part of a divine order. You're part of God's universe. You're part of something that's so big, and that you're actually in the image of God himself. That puts you in a position where making leaps is second nature, where being extraordinary is baseline. It makes you come into contact with just who you are and just what you're capable of. And that's something that is only possible through a relationship with God. Otherwise, you're just limited to, your rock and your hammer, whatever you manage to conjure up in the forest. We have abilities to tap into things that are so far beyond what we even know. And the possibilities are infinite when dealing with infinity. And as limited beings, we exist in humility before God, in service, doing the right thing, and suddenly doors open up that we never thought were possible. Seas split. Manna falls out of the sky.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the whole point, right? When just to have a summary conclusion, especially because really what I want is to have people start investigating their own roots. And this is something with my clients, and it was, whatever you are, if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Buddhist, discover your book, your source. That source has brought us together collectively as human beings. If that source diminishes, and if you think that that isn't something for you to investigate on the personal journey of what we call self-actualization or individuation, and I've noticed this across the board with all of my clients, that once they've gotten their little shifts and a little bit of footing in their life, where they all have to go is asking themselves the $1 million question: how do I want to raise my children? And it sounds glorious to say the least, but if you don't tether yourself to a value system, your children see you're untethered and left to your own vices. And I made this very clear, and it was this one guy I was speaking to. He was a very, very smart guy. The rationales that an intelligent man can create that could make him suck his own dick and he won't even know it, and I'm being vicious here when I say those words, is because human nature is frail. It's very vulnerable. If not directed and aimed upwards, it does what it does, and there's nothing you can do about it, and your rationale is what you hide behind. And so the importance of this is so that you can finally start connecting to what is true and what has stood to be true. So when people have this journey as a client or as a person that's trying to discover themselves, the best place to start is, what has shaped humanity so that we can have this conversation? What beliefs have I been raised with as a Catholic Christian, as a Protestant, as a Buddhist, as a Jew? That is going to show me a lot about where I need to be going in my life. And part of that is the discovery process of one's whole life. My teacher said this, my parents were like this, my foundation was like this. And then now you can ask yourself a question: what's true? What do I know to be true? Take that, let that be your guide, and place that in every place where people claim to say that it's the truth. You want to know if it's true? Look at the fruit that it bears. And when you struggle, how does it get you through that conflict? This is not a house of straw. You can blow at it. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that the biblical stories really convey, is that the truth seems to be untested. I mean, it seems to be, you can give it your best shot. And I can tell you one thing, growing up as an Orthodox Jew, the one thing you could not do in the religious environments is challenge what they're presenting. You want to know if somebody believes in bullshit? Challenge it once. That's it. Things that are true tend to remain, and they speak for themselves. And they spoke for us through thousands of generations. And there's something to show for it. Same thing with values. You want to see somebody and what they believe? Let their life show you what they believe. Oh, you've been to prison 3 times. Okay. Now let that speak for itself. Oh, you've only had failed relationships and you want to be married tomorrow? Let that speak for itself. At the end of the day, people have a lot of dissonance in relationship to what they do value, to what a value really is. And I think this all fundamentally starts with the eradication of an understanding of human nature. The Torah, the Bible, is a story about mankind and their relationship with God. And I really wish people can see how beautiful that relationship is. He feels for us. He's given us a foundation to experience his love. And his love exists with a tremendous amount of wrath and judgment. Because sometimes, hey, that's what you need to do for people that suck, that aren't paying attention to what they have. You got to yell at them. You got to wake them up. You got to shake them. You got to show them that their actions have consequences. People need that. It makes them feel loved. And that's being taken away too because, oh, he's too harsh. What do you think helps people? When you take their hand and you pull them, you throw them in the pool, you show them, hey, you could swim now. Of course, you embrace them with love. And we get to see this relationship between man and God through the story. And it is the one and only story, the only book that I know that has not only stood the test of time, but I believe more importantly has given people a glimpse to what this relationship is. If you started practicing that in your life, you would experience it yourself. You wouldn't go back to the book. You would live the book as you are. That is why we're here. To not just be an echo of it, but to be a manifestation of it. As Israel Horowitz, as Naftali Moses, and as to however you are. That right there is the full merging of the belief system. Because when you read the stories, you have a deep, deep understanding of it. Genesis, followed right after by heartbreaking sadness. You want to learn about men and women, Adam and Eve? Well, you want to learn about human nature? Well, I'll tell you one thing. There's going to be very few people that know how to find grace in the divine. Those people are worthy of being spared when there's a flood that'll wipe out all of mankind. Oh, you want to know what it is to walk alone with a philosophy and to have a little bit of faith? Well, then Abraham. You want to know what it's like to sacrifice your life and everything that you have so that perhaps maybe you can live everything that your God has so-called promised you? Isaac. You want to learn about duality manifested in two individuals and a struggle for people that reject their own nature and each other? Esau and Jacob. You want to learn what it is to be a dreamer? Somebody that is given purpose? Oh, the story of Joseph will give you an idea that maybe your dreams have validity in a world where dreams are just dreams, so to say. And you want to find what you're really here to do. It's in the pit. And you want to see what has collectively changed all of mankind is when we could learn to live in harmony. And that's the story of Ephraim and Manasseh. Only until then do we get into the story of Moses. You know, the story of Moses is the most transcendent because it's the accumulation of all the patriarchs prior with an understanding of the necessity to do the good even if you don't get into the promised land. Nobody said life was fair, but it's definitely meaningful. And if one can show up with all that they have, with all of their heart, with all of their soul, and all that they possess to the life that they have, with an understanding that, hey, we are here to engage in this divine dialogue. And it's actually through what we are as humans. I think that's the beginning of a better world. It's not a perfect one, but it'll be one by which people can now actually stop looking to others, and they could start looking to themselves and then start interacting with others with the basis of truth and understanding that's what we're here collectively to do. I don't know. I'm at the forefront of my lines. I've seen territory and land I've never seen before, not even only as somebody who practices psychology and somebody who coaches and helps people, but the truth is I'm being guided. And that's true for every human being on planet Earth. And if you don't have the stories, well, then you don't really understand how those stories echo in your life and how they've showed up. You've had miracles reoccurring, but you still don't believe in yourself. Well, then that's the humanity that you refuse to face that's constantly telling you something that's maybe challenging your faulty sand-like beliefs. And that's exactly where you need to go. Because, hey, if it's true, let it speak for itself. And hey, that's where the real good is.
Right at the heart of that, be fruitful and multiply, is the first thing that God tells the man and the woman. We're talking about such faith in life and in existence and in God, who's the creator of life, that you're willing to go ahead and bring more souls into this world, bring more life, and the responsibility that comes along with that. As suddenly the roles start to become clarified, what it means to be a patriarch, what it means to be a matriarch, a father and a mother who are guiding children, who are teaching the generations to come. That's faith through action, right? So many people are obsessed with proclamations of faith, as if that is going to suffice when you're in the valley of the shadow of death. Hell no.
Yeah, where are your proclamations now, boy? And I make that very clear for people. It's like you'll notice that God will disappear out of people's mouths when they're threatened. And that all of that mass that they had, the second reality hits and their nature that's unconfronted and unintegrated comes up to the surface, oh, you won't hear a word from them about morality, God, or Christ, or any of these terminologies.
But having children consciously having children,
and I think it's a big distinction,
will actually be a testament to just how much you believe in the life that God gave you.
Do you believe in what you believe in, or do you only believe in what it can get you? Not what it really means. Because ultimately, you know, to be fruitful and multiplied means you got chips in the game. And I find it to be, you know, a very beautiful commandment. And it's one that is actually, you know, intrinsic. And I believe that for people that are feeling like, oh, you know, morality is. It's not obvious, though. And I think that we've strayed so far away from obvious that, you know, we have massive
We can use a reminder.
questions of sexes and the differences between them and how we're being raised and the cultural confusion that we have. So if you ever feel like that's where we are, exactly that's where we are. So don't try to rely on the intrinsicness of it. Try to go out of your way to utilize the intrinsic that you have in relationship to it and let those two sharpen each other.
Yeah, and let the revelation open your eyes to what's actually real. You know, if God is providing you with a revelation, don't be like, I don't need it. The Holy Spirit guides me. It's like, please, read the words long written down for thousands of years that will actually tell you what is right and wrong. And yes, you don't have to spend your whole life reading those words. It's 5 not so long books. But once you have those clear principles of justice, those unshakable moral values, then you can proceed. And you can know when to avoid temptation when it comes knocking, and when to avoid sin when you're presented with the challenge.
Well, you know, honestly, this is for everybody else. I mean, my whole life has been very interesting being friends with you. I think a lot of people are afraid of judgment, right? Because it mirrors a lot of their familial traumas, and then they'll project it onto God, which means that your idea of God is a man with a beard in the sky. You're going to grow up, part of life. But I would always remember that the beauty of having somebody like you, although not appreciated by many, but I appreciate it by those that really love you, is that when I get too decorated up in the leaves and the branches, somebody can really bring you back down to the roots that could allow you to really understand the struggle of what it is to be Yisrael, you know, to struggle with the divine and to overcome. And that is the people that were in the book. And I believe this is for anybody who reads it. You become part of the people when you read it, because you are chosen, as every human being is. And to every person that picks up that book, they uphold chosenness for themselves, and they start to identify with the people. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we've suffered from as Jews is the eradication of that being what brings us together, because we like to identify with what makes us significant through our own identities and our own egos. And all that does is separate us from each other, because ultimately the truth speaks for itself. And that's actually the grounds by which we come together, by which we have children, by which we raise those children. And actually the individual flourishes that way. I know we've seen how it's went against us in a lot of ways, how it's taken us out and how it's reduced individuality. And there's no shortage of that, especially in the religious environments. And hey, I ran out too, as did you. But really coming back to the importance of understanding the law. And a lot of people don't like it, but sometimes people need to say it.
But I could actually respond to that point, because you mentioned that your own resistance to the law was the fact that you thought that it was there to limit passion, pleasure, and play.
Yes.
Right? No, not at all. It's there to show you what love is, what lust is, how sex is supposed to look, how pleasure is supposed to go and work, right? It's pleasurable to eat a pie of pizza, but watch yourself, you know, as everyone knows. We now have so much food that we have an obesity epidemic, right? The pleasure as an end to itself doesn't work. Passion as an end to itself doesn't work. God directs you on how to exchange with all of these things.
And that's exactly what we spoke about in the beginning of the conversation, which was to really see what you really desire, which is a very physical and spiritual thing, which is like a very big question. Oh, your desires, right? I'll tell you something about your desires, is that through what's really true about those desires and an investigation of them with an ideal in opposition, you get to see what you really desire. To immediately conclude a desire would be a disservice to the desire and the complexity of what desire comes with. The spirit and the eternity of a desire. Desires are beautiful. They're eternal seeds planted from God that shape us. And by the way, can make us feel a lot of shame for the things that we experience. But if we have the environment to have these kind of conversations, to promote that in not only religious environments, but in all conversations as a whole, then we start to create a space by which we can really understand what those desires are really driving towards, without all the romanticization and without all the avoidance of those things, because, hey, there's no shortage of that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and speak at a Jewish event in a little bit, and I'm going to talk about sex, and they're going to gasp. I'm going to talk about their mommy issues, and they'll lose their mind. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if we can't start having the real conversations like that, everything is just an echo chamber of where people get to hear the things that they want to hear. And by the way, the worst part is they take away what they want to hear from it.
Yeah, well, it's designed actually to cater to all of your preconceived notions and all of your biases, to massage everyone's ego and make sure everyone can walk out of there unscathed. No, it's a complete joke. All of these gatherings ultimately don't accomplish anything because people are not being honest with the issues here. And again, we have this problem where people have a desire and then they follow that desire all the way to the gates of hell.
Let's be real, right?
If you have a desire, it's not necessarily right. It's not necessarily true. It doesn't mean that's who you are. It doesn't shape your identity.
Like a desire without anything in relationship to that desire is more than likely going to lead to your own vices. And I kind of know how the story ends. And I was thinking about it. It was like, okay, you live in a world like this. And I want to relate this because I want to speak to the younger people. Honestly, the old people, you guys are too convicted in your philosophies. There's no question about it. It's a deep, deep struggle with sex. And I think where God comes up in conversation, sex typically tips out. The beliefs that exist outside of the religious teaching, right?
Yeah, not if you actually
actually read the Bible. Yeah. So you live in a world that you do today, right? There's no shortage of hookup culture, and there's definitely no shortage of people who are just also, and like, it's one of my favorite things. I love it. I'll find a Christian girl on TikTok talking about where all the good Christian boys are at. And for anybody who has half a brain can realize that's just a call for attention. That has nothing to do with that. You're just hiding behind the guises of this. And no matter how many good Christian boys are in your DMs, it doesn't really matter because you realize the way to feed your shadow. And so really, I'm looking at that particular call also through the avenues by which you do that. And remember, you're seeing vices that exist outside of what people just say. And that really gives you a light about what that is. And so even in my life, it was something I realized. It's like, oh my God, an integrated marriage where passion, play, pleasure, and great sex combined with fulfillment, love,
holiness,
trust, spirit. Those two, if I put these things together, you know what happens to people? They go, that doesn't exist. And actually, there's a reason why I'm blessed with youth, the ability to speak, and I have the people that I have surrounding me. It's because, guess what? When I'm faced with what the society has to offer me, and then what I truly desire, I fight for what I truly desire. This time, it's not just my undiscovered desires. It is my full commitment to the desire, because I think that, there is a deep, deep desire for that. But what do we often do? We misconstrued our desires because we don't understand what they're directed towards. And if you really want to know a real desire, you're going to be required to face adversity, conflict, rejection, and failure. That's how you know it's a real desire. The real desires really make you question your beliefs. And that's exactly when you start achieving the real desires, because you go, hey, this connection I'm looking for is not here. Actually, most people are sleeping. Now your desires are in function of what? The betterment of mankind. That's your purpose.
And by the way, when your desires are fueled by the right things, you actually have faith in what you're doing. You're not just a robot following some mindless path. Mm-hmm. You know in the depths of your soul that what you're fighting for is the truth, and what you're doing really does matter, and that your heart is pure because God knows your heart.
Question. Just so you could share this, what made you want to do what you're doing now?
Well, I saw that the answers actually are in the Torah, and I saw within myself over many years my own deficiencies in accepting that narrative, partly due to corruption from external sources, partly due to internal corruption from my own resistance to truth and to humbling myself before God. But once that I realized that all of the falsehood that I perceived in religion was man-made, and that all of my own resistance to following God was the result of my lesser nature getting in the way of my higher nature, it was at that point that I realized that I needed to change my life. And it wasn't enough for me to just be combative and disdainful, because that's kind of where I was at for a while. You know, I was thinking about that on the way here. Is that
Isn't that beautiful, right?
When you're dealing with so much inhuman shit, you start to become inhuman. You know, when you find yourself battling all of this stuff that like actually doesn't make any sense from a human perspective, then that actually starts to have an effect on you where you can't even live. But when you start to realize that the Torah is the book of life, and it's the commandments that are there so that you can live with them, so that we can actually envision a future not just on an individual scale, but on a national scale and on a global scale, where the Spirit of God actually inhabits all, and people exist in a unity that's not just a oneness that's a joke. No, it's a complex unity that's the amalgamation of literally billions of human beings. But we can all tap into what it really means to be a human being. Mm-hmm. And God defines that.
Was there an incident in your life that made you go, I'm going to do this? Because I mean, we're talking about desires. And I think that, the desires that truly fulfill us are on the other side of a war we need to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that after recognizing that this is what consistently kept coming up, even when I tried to walk down other avenues and try to shy away from it, try to even deny religion, to try to come up with all sorts of ways to create the antithesis to what I actually needed to be doing, which is to serve God. And anyone that serves God needs to take the resources that they have and the abilities that they have and put that to good use. And I myself know the history that I have in Judaism and the knowledge that I have of Jewish culture, Jewish law, Jewish tradition, and the Bible itself. And I know how lacking that is. I know how much confusion there is surrounding that. People hear all sorts of weird traditions, all sorts of fake laws that are made up, all sorts of confusion that surrounds texts, all sorts of...
A lot of chaos.
A
need for order.
Exactly. But it's not my order, because the order already exists. God is primordial, right? His word is created existence. There's a denial of just how real God is from the religious sects and from the secular sects. And ultimately, people are absorbed in their own morality and not in God's morality. And I pray every day that I'm not victim to that, because it's a very easy thing to happen.
So what made you do this now?
Now? Well, to be honest, I didn't think I'd be doing this now. I thought, like a couple of years down the line, maybe 10 years, married with a bunch of children, multimillionaire, then, I'll go teach Torah for public service. But things worked out in my own personal life to the point where it just happened now. Mm-hmm. And God's basically saying, don't wait.
You looked at the bush and you asked, why does it burn?
Yeah, why does it burn, but it's not consumed?
Back.
And God calls, and that's the thing, is there is a calling. And
why am I 24 and not married? Right?
Yeah, exactly. At that point,
and he's like, Israel. And
at that point, we got to start looking for other avenues.
I find that so rich, so beautiful. Even in my life, everything I was told by my mother was, like, Naftali, you have kids, and when you do this, you save your money for a down payment on a house, and then you can go do the thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's part of the Orthodox culture where they've romanticized marriage and taken it out of context and told you that you can only get married through their system, and then...
Well, it's a whole different conversation.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's a roller coaster, but the point is that stop romanticizing a fantasy that doesn't exist. Recognize...
Start seeing how reality demands you to show up, because anomalies will happen, right? And you need to look. And then, if anything you could wrap this up with is, your life has a calling, and it amounts to pivotal moments. And, because this is part of what I do, I want people to be able to realize that within the contents of this. Like, you have a foundation to interact with reality now, a basis of morality, like, just enough, not everything. You're not a scholar, you won't be. Most likely not. But as the human you are, you have the capacity to understand the text, Don't let anyone take that from you, and understand what you get is what you need to continue doing good. And if people don't understand that that's enough, then at no point it will be enough. You don't need to be Dr. Jordan Peterson. You don't need to be a philosopher. You don't need to be an excellent scholar. You need to be a human being in order to interact with the divine. And that's for all of mankind. Yeah. And when you start there and you end there, what end up you realize is that, you will have your burning bush moment where you pay attention to the ordinary of your small life as it calls back onto you. And then there's your plan. But only once you've let it go completely.
And it's on your way. Mm-hmm. It's in your path. It's something that just occurs, but it's so deeply a part of who you are, right? Moses is so far away from his people, all the way from the beginning. He's literally raised as an Egyptian prince, but he's the one who comes to save his people, even though he's all the way far away in Midian, because those are his roots. And getting back to the roots, that's where the key is. Right? When you go on the quest for the key, find your roots. What is truest to you, to your history, to your family, to your background, to the tools that you were given, to the environment that you were raised in? That wasn't an accident. I always perceive that as such a confirmation when God says the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. Right? And God places such an emphasis on honoring your father and mother, no matter who they are, and no matter what they've done. What does that mean? They birthed you. They birthed you into this existence.
I love to look at it as this. If you cannot honor the roots by which you were born, all of what you are is rejected.
Exactly. You're just rejecting yourself, and you're just rejecting God and his plan, and you're rejecting everything. And that's why he says, if you do honor them, then your days will be lengthened upon the earth, because you will be grounded and you'll be integrated with the life that God put you in. And you're not going to be trying to find a quick, easy way out. You're not going to be like, oh yeah, my parents fucked me over, so now whatever, I'm a Satanist. Grow up,
Well, yes, there's a certain level of transcendence in relationship to that, and a lot of letting go. And look, to be honest with you, if God had to utter 10 things, and they were the embodiment of freedom and truth, so many people are still slaves to the past that has harmed them. And to be able to honor is a deep, deep understanding of the collection of masculine and feminine that allowed you to be here, and how that's shaped you. And when you can come to terms with that, why would you want to reject that? It'll set you free. The main goal is go out of your way to map out your faith, not believe it blindly in man, to have an understanding that the divine in man has been a constant struggle since the dawn of time. And that through our humanity and through all of the vices that you have been taught to reject, you now embrace and incorporate and direct towards the ideal and what God wants from you. That is how you set yourself free, how you discover your purpose, how you live your best life, and the beginning of something extraordinary beyond your own beliefs. And that's what we call the freedom of your life.
Make it personal. Read the words yourself. Start from the beginning. In the beginning, God created. Recognize that this story is about the individual and God. It's about human beings and their relationship to God. And stop letting other people be your intermediary. Stop letting barriers exist between you and God. Rip them all down. Rule over sin, as God tells Cain, and become the human being that you're supposed to become.
Amen.